All right, welcome back. My name is Merrick, your host. This is the Movement Experience, episode 14, and I am with my friend Ian Hamilton.
Hi, Merrick.
How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Feeling good?
Yeah.
It's a rainy, blustery day out there. It's cold. We've got our hot coffee. We're ready to jump in.
Let's dive.
So who are you? What do you do?
My name is Ian Hamilton, besides being a hockey teammate of Merrick's.
That's right, Moose Knuckle.
Heyo.
Knuckle for life, baby.
I'm a fisheries biologist. I work with an indigenous fisheries organization made up of about 24 different First Nations.
Okay, so a fisheries biologist. So
Correct.
Marine biologist is the macro of what you do?
Yeah, I did most of my formal training in marine, saltwater environments.
Okay.
Most of what we do now is in river.
Oh, okay.
So
Which is a mix, right? It's brine or whatever.
Yeah, to about the Mission Bridge, it's tidal, and then anything upstream of there is primarily fresh.
Oh, okay.
So most of our work focuses in river. We
Yep.
don't deal with a lot of the issues offshore, because
Right.
the communities that we work with primarily focus on their own traditional territories and reserves, which are obviously within the Lower Mainland.
Okay, so marine biology is the macro.
Correct.
What for someone who's listening in, they understand a little bit. I mean, when I think of marine biology, I think of George Costanza acting like a marine biologist,
Yes.
trying to impress some chicks.
Yeah,
And then he's walking on the beach, and lo and behold, Kramer has hit a golf ball into a whale's blowhole. And he ends up
remember that.
pulling it out or whatever, saving this whale's life. So that's what I think of when I think of marine biology.
It doesn't look like that in
No,
real
okay.
life, right?
That's what I was going to say. How real is it? So let's talk about what is marine biology. Let's first of all, let's get into why did you want to get into this? So, what was your interest in this?
I grew up in the Great Lakes on the east side of Toronto, a place called Scarborough.
Okay.
My parents had a sailboat since I was able to walk and talk.
Sweet.
And we'd spend 6 or 8 weeks a summer
Yep.
on the boat in Bay of Quinte, Thousand Islands, Kingston, Ontario, St. Lawrence River.
Wow.
So I was introduced to the water pretty well full time since
Yep.
I was a kid.
And if you guys don't know, sailing is freaking awesome. It is an unbelievably unique experience. If you've never been sailing, get someone that you know that knows how to sail and get them to take you sailing, because it is a beautifully unique, powerful experience. It really is. I love sailing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As a kid, I used to get bored with it because it was too slow.
Of course.
But then as a kid, I think you're not interested in the journey
Right.
as you are as you become an adult. You're only interested in point A to point B.
Right.
But I was still put on the boat, and I would spend, as an only child, it was just me, my mom and dad, and our dogs.
Right.
We'd spend probably 4 to 5 weeks offshore in the river.
That's sick.
And I would say that probably molded me as a human. In terms of sort of my interests, my passions.
Right.
My dad was a heavy sailor, so was my mom.
What did your parents do?
They're in IT.
Oh, wow.
They're like the
So this was
black
apart
and
from
white
what they
difference.
did.
Totally.
This is their escape.
I've always, since I sort of graduated school and started a professional quote unquote career, I've been their vacation excuse,
Right.
which they've loved.
Right.
But yeah, they're totally different than me. Like, they're, like you look at family photos and it's like you're the milkman's kid,
Right.
Like I'm a ginger, neither of them are. They're both in IT. Like they kind of professionally established themselves when early computer systems were being developed, sort of pre-internet, and then getting in from like the DOS to Microsoft switch was where my mom did most of her work. So like they're all like in a cubicle, office-based
Wow.
work.
So this was pure escapism for them.
They
Must have loved it.
I'm a total other side of the coin
Right.
from them. So yeah, I think they appreciate it from the standpoint of it gave them a different perspective on lots of things.
Sure.
But I also gave them an excuse to.
Well, I
come
mean,
and
hats
visit,
off,
take part.
hats off to them. I think it's a great testament for a parent when they can raise a child who gets to express themselves in the way that they want, completely apart from what the parent is, right?
Totally.
So often you have parents that are like, "Oh, this is my favorite team. You're going to cheer for this team, and we're a hockey family, and you're going to cheer for hockey, and this is what." Versus, you got a sports dad with a musician son. Well done, sports dad.
Right.
That's the way I kind of look at it. Like if you're in an IT cubicle and you've got a son who's literally,
Carbon copy.
yeah, then it's like, well, that's expected. But to have a son doing the exact opposite, I think that's pretty cool for your parents. So hats off to them. That's good.
Yeah, I give them a lot of credit there. My dad came from a very religious family, so like there was part of him, I think, that always wanted to have that sort of like systematic control, but
Sure.
they never forced it on me. It
Good.
was never like, you're going to church. It
Right.
was, what do you want to do? And it's like, well, I want to play hockey. And it's like, well, if you're not playing hockey, what do you want to do? It's like, well, let's go on the boat. Like,
Yeah.
those are the only two things as a kid that existed in
I
my
want to
world,
inspect
right?
fish guts.
Later,
Yeah.
Later that came. Actually, no, that's probably not true. That probably came early too. But yeah, I'm a completely flip side to like what my parents had done. It's
Yeah.
a different time.
Sure.
Obviously, the opportunities that we have now probably weren't apparent
Yep.
back when they were growing up. But yeah, they basically just sort of let me run loose like a wild animal and figure myself out.
Yeah. So you're spending your summers or vacation time on the boat with them.
Yep.
So you're around the water.
Totally.
So where did this love start to develop? What was it?
I think it started with trauma, as strange as that sounds.
Interesting.
Jaws.
Yeah.
It's my favorite movie. I know Steven Spielberg hates the fact that he made it because of the negative influence it had. But
Sure. And for those of you who don't know what he's talking about, the negative influence is movies that are largely based on CGI or like effects and not based on storytelling. So Jaws was a pivotal point in motion pictures that got away from the beauty of the story and got to the thrill of the excitement. So that's kind of what Jaws is that kind of pivotal point in cinematic history, if that's what you mean.
yeah, that and the fact that put a stigma on an animal that
Pull this right there.
right there.
Yeah.
Sorry, put a stigma on an animal that wasn't accurate, and as a result, like there's a line in the movie: if you yell barracuda, no one listens.
Right.
You yell shark, everyone's out of the water, and that's where it started.
Interesting.
That was the first time in society that I think there'd been a fear of the water that had been forced into people.
Yeah, an unjust fear of
Totally.
water. It's funny because you're more likely to die from a falling coconut
Yep.
than you are from a shark
By my orders of magnitude.
by like 10 times. Like it's wild. Like people are ridiculous. Like they fear sharks in the water. Look up. When you're on the beach, those coconuts are going to kill you.
Yep.
I think they kill, I can't remember what it was. It was something, I don't want to throw the number out and be wrong, but it was something like 17 shark deaths versus like 160 coconut deaths.
I think
something wild like
several
that.
hundred people a year get killed by vending machines.
There you go.
Right?
There
Like
you go.
you're more likely
Yeah.
when you have the munchies of getting killed
Yeah.
than you are by going for a swim.
Well, can you imagine putting your money in, getting that bag of chips,
and then
and then
dying.
not getting the chips? I mean, you got to get your hand up there, and you're shaking the machine.
Yep. And then you die.
Yeah, and then you die.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they got to bury you with your arm still in the vending
And then
machine
you're a
because you're not
statistic.
letting go of the bag of chips.
Yeah.
Anyways,
Yeah.
so we digress. So
That's okay.
Jaws happened
Jaws happened. That scared the living bejesus out of me.
for sure.
But it also,
Dun.
I know it's iconic,
Dun.
right? But I think in the same way that it terrified me, it also sort of really interested me.
Right.
Right, like that became. I was terrified of going in the water for a summer, but I was
Sure.
also doing nothing but reading shark books. Like,
Yeah.
I was fresh obsessed, right? So as long as I was on dry land, I was fine. You put me in the water, and you have that inhuman, inaccurate fear that you're just going to get eaten in a lake of all places.
Ironically, that's why humans survived, is the fear of the ability to be afraid of what they couldn't see, or the bush shaking, so they know there's something in the bush. Bushes don't shake on their own, so they would stay away from the bush. Stuff like that. That's actually why we, over the other species that we were competing with, that's why Homo sapiens were the dominant species, because we could communicate our fears of the potential dangers.
Darwinism.
Yeah,
the
that's
dumb
right.
ones went in the bush.
Right.
The smart ones didn't.
Correct. Yeah, or swam in the ocean with the sharks.
Exactly. Yeah. Which in actual
Metaphorically.
fact isn't actually that dangerous.
Right.
Yeah.
So anyways,
Yep.
You're watching sharks,
Yep.
and then what happens?
I think I kept that passion all throughout sort of younger years of school.
So you wanted to be in marine biology
Yeah.
from an early
I
get-go.
wanted to be Hooper from Jaws. I wanted to be
Right.
Richard Dreyfuss.
Right.
Like that. I saw that guy and I was like, that's me.
Or the kid from Flipper.
Or more likely Hooper, but yeah, so it's same general idea.
Yeah. Free Willy.
Yes, yeah. But I wanted to be Matt Hooper. I
Right.
wanted to be the guy.
Right.
Maybe not on the boat being eaten by the shark, but I wanted to be
Yeah.
the guy that when something came up, they called. I
Right.
was like, that needs to be me. How do I do that?
That's it.
So
Ocean life.
I just dove into it.
So you went to high school, went to university.
Correct. I went to high school, came out, did my undergrad in Mount Allison University in Sackville, New Brunswick, which is nowhere near an ocean.
Perfect.
Yeah, great idea.
Yeah.
But they had a very good undergrad program. So
Not a lot of hands-on.
No,
experience.
not a lot of no. And then I ended up doing my master's degree at Memorial University in St. John's, Newfoundland.
Okay.
But primarily because I found a couple of supervisors, researchers at the university, professors that were interested in the research direction that I wanted to go.
Which was
I was at the time living in the Bahamas with my wife, working at a research institute and running a shark research program.
Sick.
So I had some particular research interests that I wanted to follow.
Yep.
But it didn't fit, and this is what we can talk about later, is how do you get into this. I was picture perfect average student.
Okay.
I was not your overachiever. I was not your valedictorian. I was not the smartest kid in the class.
Yep.
According to my transcripts, I'm mentally handicapped.
Mine too.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
So like I wasn't up for scholarship, so I had to get creative.
Sure.
So to go back to grad school, I basically built a project and then kind of cold call sold it to a number of researchers at Canadian universities until I found a couple that were interested in the research question.
Why Canadian universities? You're in the Bahamas. Why?
Yeah.
Why? I mean, there's obviously schools throughout the United States.
Totally.
I would assume there's schools down there that are especially, focusing in this.
The University of Miami is really big in shark research. They fund a lot of the work that goes out of the Bimini Shark Lab. Money. The cost of going to a United States university was exponentially more
Staggering.
than rooting myself in a Canadian university, asking the same research question,
Right.
having the same quality of schooling, but not paying
Right.
the extra digit on the end of your tuition.
Yeah,
right?
that's about the way to look
And
at
as
it.
someone who is completely academically average,
Right.
I couldn't pursue the scholarship, so it wasn't
Yeah,
an
yeah.
option. I couldn't offset the cost of that.
Sure.
So to me, it was, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to go back home. I'm going to root it in a Canadian university.
Yeah.
I would also like a little bit more exposure for people at Canadian universities to realize that these kind of pursuits outside of just cold water environments
Right.
are possible, and bring a little bit more of the, I guess you could call it the creativity in your academic pursuit of, you don't just need to follow the mold of A, B, C, D equals E, right? Like
Right.
you can go different ways, you can figure out different methods to get
Yeah.
to different places, and
Different avenues.
totally. And I also had two very, pardon my language, shit-hot researchers that wanted to fund and support the research direction that I wanted to go in, which
Right.
was the sell point at the end of the day. So
let's have two questions that you kind of glossed over. What got you down to the Bahamas? What were you down there for? And so how'd you get down there? And then let's go back in after that into the research.
for sure.
Okay.
How did I get down there? I went down there to volunteer with a marine research station,
Okay.
which I ended up working for and then taking over.
Oh, wow.
It's where I met my wife, strangely enough.
Nice.
One
Is
of the-
she from the Bahamas?
No, she's English.
Oh,
But
okay.
she came down to do a very similar thing that I did, which was take a job at this research.
She's also a
institute.
Jaws fan.
Not as much as I am. Much more of a dog fan, but
Okay.
she tolerates my
Yeah,
my
Jaws obsession. Absolutely.
and I think she recognized that right off the bat, that my perception of risk tolerance was significantly different to hers.
Okay. Like you're willing to get in the cage and go down with the sharks kind of thing?
I don't even want the cage.
Oh, really?
Some I would. Great whites, you got to be crazy if you're getting out of the cage with them. But for the most
Why?
part, the rest of them, just because they're so big and unpredictable.
Right.
Others you can kind of read, but I also found just the adrenaline rush was being around an animal that could like take you out if it wanted to was very sort of centering.
Yeah, no
Gives you
doubt.
perspective of not just being this alpha animal that humans think we are.
Yeah. Well, we are in a way, but when you're compared to that,
Totally.
you're in their environment, and they
Different
they
medium,
can
different animal.
snap you in half
Yeah.
with a bite.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I was running a research station in Andros on the east side of the Bahamas. My wife came down, took a job. I met her there. And then we subsequently moved to a different research institute on the other side of the country, in an island called Eleuthera. And that's where I started really sort of soul focusing into the shark research angle, which is what I did for about 3.5, 4 years.
What was the research for?
It was part of a conservation program.
Okay.
So the Bahamas has been really proactive recently in protecting waters for sharks so they can't
Okay.
be harvested.
Yeah.
And
And
part of
so we know
Yep.
people are harvesting these sharks for what purpose?
shark finning.
And the shark finning alludes to medical stuff, and I think in Eastern medicine they have something to do with shark fins.
Yeah, it's a sign of high society in a lot of Asian countries. So having shark fin soup at weddings is a sign of sort of high standing.
Oh,
It has no medical or physical property that's beneficial to humans.
So
It's
a
just
cultural thing for them.
It's a
status.
cultural status symbol,
Right.
and the demand for it is so high that
Like me eating bald eagle eggs for breakfast.
totally.
Yeah, got it.
or baby panda bears.
Right.
But
They're not my favorite.
no, I know they're a little chewy.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's the perception of that, and now as a result, we have 100 million sharks a year being killed for the shark finning industry.
Whoa, how much?
100 million.
A year?
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's the estimate.
That's insane.
That is a massive number on a genocidal.
Dude,
rate.
that's not even like. There's no way that's sustainable.
It's not.
That's insane.
Yeah.
100 million a year for fins.
Yep.
How do they let this happen?
Because it happens in international waters where there's no single country jurisdiction. So as a result,
that's got to change.
Politics.
That's got to change.
And
people don't understand how the health of our oceans is so. I mean, you know this, but it's so crucial for the health of our planet. Like the tides, the warm currents that come up and warm Europe. All of these things, like everything matters in the ocean. And it's insane. Like I know I have a bone to pick with commercial fishing because there's like 50% of the plastics in the ocean are nets from commercial fishing.
Ghost nets, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, I mean, I've got a bone to pick with that. Like we are over harvesting the ocean like insane. So anyways, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. We will talk about it later, I'm sure.
We can dive there later, yeah.
Yeah, that's insane. 100 million sharks per year, 4 fins.
That's the estimate, yeah. Some of it is bycatch. From like commercial gill netting and stuff like that, but there is a very black market target on shark fins, and the number of animals they take a year is just mind-blowing.
That's insane, man.
Yeah.
Gosh, that's insane. I would assume it's like illegal,
totally,
but they don't really do anything to enforce it.
Some countries will have a ban.
Yep.
100 million. But when you have such a high black market demand,
I mean, how many
enforcement?
How many sharks are in the ocean?
I don't know. That's more than 100 million because we're taking a year, and I think that's come down a little bit. But like you're talking about the apex predator in the ocean that keeps that critical ecosystem that keeps us alive in check.
100%.
We're just wiping it out.
To put that like an analogy to that, so they reintroduced wolves into Yellowstone.
That's a cool story.
Yeah. So what they did is they bring wolves in, and what ends up happening is the wolves are now keeping the caribou, deer, and all the other natural prey animals to them at bay, which before they had no predators. So the grasslands start coming back, ecosystem starts coming back, and the whole trickle down is an entirely more diverse, healthy ecosystem for every animal in the area. Natural habitats are returning, things of that nature. So taking away the top predator, people think it's like, oh yeah, no wolves. That's great. Now the little deers get to run around and die of old age. That's terrible for the actual ecosystem. It's awful. It's the same thing in the ocean. You take away these large predator, then you get too many of the other fish, which end up eating too much other products, which take away the smaller things, and the whole system gets thrown out of balance.
You're describing a trophic cascade.
Yes, it's horrific. People don't realize this. It's bad, man. It's real bad. Even like tunas and stuff like that, like the overfishing of tunas. And tunas are, they're doing their business, man. They're eating all these other little fish, and it's part of the
necessary
system. 100%.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like, we have a, people are against seal clubbing and stuff like that. Obviously, it's pretty barbaric, but it's like, or like in Louisiana, they do alligator harvests, right? Because there's so many alligators and stuff like that. They have to harvest alligators. It sounds awful.
Yep.
But if you don't, you get a real bad fallout from that.
Totally.
So anyways, we digress. So 100 million sharks getting finned. You were doing research. They're in the area. They're protecting sharks.
Yeah, they've turned the territorial waters into a shark sanctuary. So
nice.
No catch, no keep, no target, no nothing.
Nice.
Which makes it a very good place to be able to do research and ask questions about those animals that you wouldn't be able to otherwise.
Right.
Because you have abundance, you have a variety of different habitats they use, so
right.
you can sort of focus in different areas. My work focused with lemon sharks in inshore nurseries. So like
what's a lemon shark?
It's an Atlantic species of shark, named because it looks kind of yellow.
Oh, okay.
They're really sort of abundant down in the Florida Caribbean area.
Like the size of a tiger shark kind of thing, or?
They're probably about 9 to 10 feet full growth. So you're probably talking 3, maybe 3.5 meters when they're fully mature.
So decent.
Big, yeah. They're not small when you see them.
Yeah.
They're like you look at them and it's like that's a shark, right?
Right.
Like,
yeah. You're not confused.
No, but the females they give birth to like 12 to 14 live pups in nurseries within the mangrove creeks. So each mangrove creek has its own subpopulation of juvenile lemon sharks, and when they're juveniles, they don't move. So you basically get little like genetically isolated creek pockets of animals that you can ask research questions about because they don't co-mix.
Huh.
It's really quite strange.
That is cool.
Yeah. It's called natal site fidelity. That the juveniles basically stay where they are for 2 to 4 years before they move out of that creek.
Dang, that's a long time.
Yeah. So I took advantage of that in the fact that you get a different pocket of animals in each creek, and started looking at about 9 or 10 different creek systems to look at resource variation and habitat quality, water quality, and
Sure.
seeing how that impacts growth. And then looking at the predator side of, what does higher or lower predation pressure due to growth rates, habitat use, et cetera. So it was a lot of very sort of specific.
And the idea of this
questions.
research
Yep.
is to be able to have better habitats for sharks?
To better understand how they use it, what the key factors are, and
Right.
what kind of needs to be protected and preserved.
Right.
When you're looking at how
Because
to
if you don't
manage
know,
land.
if you don't know what to preserve, then
Totally.
it's like the climate science stuff.
Yeah, and there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure in that country for coastal development. If you go down to the Bahamas, obviously everyone wants to be on the beach.
Absolutely
It
makes sense.
Perfect sense.
Absolutely makes sense.
So there's a lot of pressure on those coastal areas. Well, those coastal areas are mangroves.
Right.
And those
So
mangroves are critical. Like
Yeah.
3/4 of reef fish have a life phase in the mangroves.
Right.
So 75% of the fish you see on a reef will have one stage of their life that's in the mangroves.
So wow,
they're that critical.
take away that, there goes 75%.
Take away that, and there goes 75% of
the
life
habitat that
phase
they
of,
need,
of a
yeah.
bunch of the fish that are out there.
Wow.
A large majority, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I was focusing there, and that's kind of where the shark research angle started.
Okay.
And those were the animals I was looking at when I went back to school and did my master's degree.
So you were doing your master's up in
Yep.
Canada.
Out of Memorial, but I was living and working in the Bahamas at the time at a research institute.
Oh,
So I
okay.
was kind of abroad from
Got
the
it.
university. I would
Yeah.
go back for courses and then to write.
Yep.
But all of my field work and time away from the university, I was down south.
Wow.
Yeah, wasn't the worst.
No, not bad at all. Not bad at all.
Mm-mm.
So that ran its course. You got your master's.
Ran its course, and then I got very tired of academia. It has its purpose.
For sure.
And I recognize that. But there are some flaws with academia. It's, especially when you get into the shark world, it can be somewhat nepotistic, very cliquey.
I would argue that's almost in everything.
Definitely.
Yeah.
In
I mean, not
academia,
even
it's
in just
cutthroat.
academia, but like everything
For sure.
is that way. But I mean, academia, yeah, I get it.
So I just got kind of disenchanted with the idea of being poor for another 5 years if I wanted to do my PhD.
Right.
And then potentially being poor in debt for significant years after that until I could land a tenure track job, when it's like, why wouldn't I just go out into industry, use the education I have,
Right.
and fast track the process,
Sure.
speed it up?
Yeah.
So, it kind of ran its course. My wife and I also decided we just wanted to sell everything and go work as dive instructors after I'd finished that, because that was like 3 or 4 years of very intense work.
Yeah.
So we just like sold everything, our car, everything, and just packed off and moved to Mexico and then a few different places throughout Asia for 3 or 4 years after
And we're
that.
diving instructors.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sweet.
So that was kind of
How long did that last?
it was about 4 to 5 years.
Wow.
Um,
Nice.
Yeah, we were in the Caribbean for 2. We were in Borneo, northeastern Borneo.
Where's that?
Borneo is directly west of Australia.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Giant island that has
Yeah.
orangutans. That's where they come from.
Oh, sick.
So
didn't
we were
know
there
that.
for about 2.5 years.
Okay.
Running a dive center there.
Opposite. I mean, the Great Barrier Reef's on the opposite side
Yes,
of
it is.
Australia.
Correct.
So, is there anything on that side?
Yeah, you've got the Coral Sea,
Okay.
which has some of the highest biodiversity of marine life anywhere.
That's sick.
Yeah, it's kind of like the biodiversity jewel, and we were right in the middle of it.
That's super cool.
Very interesting cultural experience.
I bet. And you're not researching;
No.
you're just enjoying the view, so to speak, underwater.
Yeah, enjoying the view. We were doing a lot of teaching and a lot of guiding.
Okay. To who? Tourists?
Yeah, primarily interested divers or people that wanted to come out and get certified to dive. So
Okay.
my wife and I would teach and guide and spend a lot of time underwater, probably 3 to 4 hours a day.
I would imagine that you got your diving and stuff like that while you were going through school and doing your research
I
for
did.
sharks and stuff.
Yeah, that was always.
I mean, you're living in the water.
It made sense. I got certified when I was like 12 or 13.
Oh wow. Okay. So you've been diving for a long time.
I've been at it for a while.
I hear that BC actually has a lot of good diving waters.
If you can deal with the cold, it really does.
Really?
Yeah.
So you got to have the
Campbell
dry
River's
suit.
supposed to be really good. I've never been out there.
Okay.
There's a place off of Souk, BC called Race Rocks. It's
Race
a
Rocks.
national marine park.
Okay.
It's probably one of the top 5 cold water diving spots on the planet.
Wow. What makes it so good?
The currents, the animal life, just the health of the area in general. I got certified out there in Souk because the first time I ever like really went underwater was in a very heavy wetsuit in very, very cold water off of southern Vancouver Island.
Yeah.
But if you can deal with it with the added equipment and cold temperatures and stuff like that, it's fantastic.
Right.
But that kind of diving isn't for everyone.
Yeah. I mean, when I think of tropics,
of course, that's what everybody
does. I think of clownfish and rainbow fish and just the most surreal experience.
You mean you don't think of like 14 millimeters of neoprene and 34 pounds of weight, hood, gloves, boots? That doesn't. No.
Doesn't turn my crank, man.
That's why most people don't cold water dive.
Right. So the people that are doing it are the hardcores. They're the ones that
really
want to do it. Yeah. Got it.
Because most people will just sort of sell out to the idea of like, I want to wear rash guard and board shorts.
Right.
And jump in the water where it's sunny, not have to lug all of my stuff down to the ocean shore and put on all this stuff to see a couple fish and some kelp.
Right.
So
fish and some kelp.
Yeah. There's a lot more to it. Don't get me wrong.
Sure.
I'm not underselling the area, but it doesn't have the same kind of general appeal aesthetically as warm water.
Canada's cold, man.
Canada is
so cold.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, anyways, so where were we?
We were moving up to education.
Right.
Did the shark thing run its course? Somewhat, but it kind of opened the door to where I am now.
Right.
Because of the education background and experience I had doing that. Dive instructing was something we would always wanted to do.
Yep.
And then we did that and worked 70-hour weeks for 4 years, and we're like, no, we're done.
Wow, 70-hour week. Wow.
It can be a grind over there.
I bet.
A lot of the companies will just continue to cater to the demand.
Yeah, of course.
In places where diving is really good, the demand is very high, so it doesn't die down.
Right.
So they just run you, which goes with the territory. You know what you're getting into.
Here's your next group. Here's your next group.
Totally.
Right.
6 days a week, 1 day off.
So you were done.
We got very tired, just physically tired of that.
Oh, I can imagine.
And diving does have its dangers. So like the longer you do it statistically, you're more likely to get things like decompression sickness.
Right.
So I was like, okay, let's call it while we're young and healthy and not push it.
What is decompression sickness for those listening on radio waves?
Yeah, sorry. So that is the syndrome has a whole different number of side effects, but decompression sickness is basically when you come up from underwater too quickly when you're breathing compressed gas. So your body basically turns into a shaken up Coke can.
Oh, wow.
So the molecules of air in your blood expand too fast to get out of your capillaries, and then there's a whole number of side effects that you can suffer from it. But
sounds incredibly painful.
It's pressure-based trauma disease.
Right. Pressure-based trauma disease.
Yeah, it's a barometric trauma.
This is why these underwater welders live in these little pods for like a week at a time.
They live in bells. Yep.
Yeah. Bells, they're called?
Yeah, dive bells.
Okay.
That's why they stay in those, so they can stay pressurized and not deal with the symptoms of
And they basically live in there for like a week or 40 days? Like, what is it?
Yeah, some of them. I knew a guy who used to work for the Special Boat Service in England, and he was a commercial diver with them, and he was down for 30 days at a time.
Oof.
And then off for like 3 months.
Oof.
He said it was a hard toll. It was a lot of money.
Yeah.
But
dude, that's
can
tough.
be very dangerous.
That's so tough, though.
It's a major toll.
And you
on
can't
your
be
body.
claustrophobic if you're living down in that bell. My God,
you'll lose your mind.
You're in a coffin.
Yeah.
For 30 days.
Yeah.
How is that mentally sustainable?
That's why I never did it.
Yeah, no doubt.
I have no interest in that.
Yeah, the money's good, but
money is good, but otherwise, yeah. So we got out because we got tired of it. We also wanted to try this whole like being an adult thing.
Yeah, what's that like?
I'm new at it.
Overrated.
Yeah. We sort of lived on vacation for the better part of 10 years.
Right.
And then sort of, it's like, well, if we want to retire, we need to have money, so we should try this career thing.
Yeah, you should probably work for a living. Yeah.
So the only place I could convince my wife to come in Canada was the warmest place in the country, which is the Lower Mainland in BC.
Right. So you started looking for jobs here.
I started looking for jobs here in 2018 when we'd gotten back from Borneo.
Yep.
Knowing that we were going to make the move west. There is work and there's tons of career opportunities in a place like Toronto, but I was not interested in working in lake systems.
Right.
Which is really quite ironic to say now because I now work in a number of lake systems. But I didn't want just to work in. No, I know it's weird. Right?
As a way of giving you exactly what you don't want.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's so funny.
Let's move away to do exactly that. I just didn't want to work in just lake systems. I wasn't a limnologist or like a freshwater lake specialist. That wasn't where my training was.
Sure.
I need the ocean.
Sure.
Otherwise, I get cranky.
Yeah.
And working in a river that's partly tidal was a good compromise.
Pretty close.
So we moved out here in 2018, and that's when I took the job. Which has evolved on a number of fronts since I originally took it, but that's what brought us out here, and that's why we kind of brought the family out this way.
So what is the job? What do you do?
So I manage the technical division, or the biology department at the Lower Fraser Fisheries Alliance. So I look after about 10 to 12 technical biological staff, professional biologists, and we provide technical services to the First Nations communities from the mouth of the Fraser to Yale. So our organization is made up of 24 First Nations who have signed on to our governance protocol, or sort of our operations code. We started by providing communication support. The organization started in 2010. So it was primarily just providing the communities in the Fraser more information about what's going on with harvest opportunities in the Fraser.
What do you mean by harvest opportunities? What are you harvesting?
When the salmon are running, the nations go out there and harvest fish. They fish in the main stem of the Fraser with gill nets or seine nets, and that's regulated by our federal government.
So for those that don't know, First Nations can fish with nets, whereas the average guy can do it with a line.
Correct.
So,
and there's a lot behind that, but we won't get into that.
That's their right. Their right. Their historical right.
Correct.
So that's the way they've been doing it for thousands of years. Right.
So we were providing communications, and then as the organization developed, they started providing technical capacity. So fisheries management biologists that would work with the communities as an aggregate rather than individually to bring a more unified front to deal with DFO, Department of Fisheries and Oceans, our federal government. And then from there, we kind of expanded out into habitat and restoration, stewardship and conservation. So we have 3 different departments that do 3 different things within the organization.
What's the purpose?
The purpose is to basically provide First Nations communities more ability and capacity to address fish and aquatic habitat-related issues within their reserve and traditional territories. Because the federal government, in a lot of places, has significantly more capacity than the First Nations communities, and they don't have the same kind of technical experts at the community to be able to battle back and forth, push back on the government, and discuss how land use decisions and aquatic habitat decisions are made. So we've been working for the last 10 years or so, and I've only been there for about 6, on building capacity in the communities and providing them kind of the technical acumen that they need to develop things while building capacity. So like we'll start with addressing fish and fish-related habitat issues on reserve, like a big busted culvert. We'll put together a project, we'll find funding, we'll train staff members and community members, and we'll bring funding into the community so that they can hire people on to do that, so that as the project develops, we can slowly over time pull ourselves back from it. Leave the community not only with a functional project, but also with the capacity to be able to manage it long term. So we've got about 35 different projects all across the river doing habitat-related and fisheries management, stock assessment-related projects.
So you want to make sure that the natural habitat of the fish is as open as possible, pristine as possible, the best word for it?
Protected and managed properly. And important in that is making sure that the nations have a voice in managing that.
So this is a benefit for the nations because they're going to get more fish. Obviously, if the habitats are properly functioning, the fish are going to be reproducing at a higher level. You're giving them the knowledge to harvest now and not then. I assume that kind of stuff as well?
And I mean, some of that is dictated by the federal government when the harvest openings are for the community. But
so there is regulation for them as well. So the federal government is making sure that the fish are spawning, they're getting the chance to lay their eggs and fertilize and stuff like that. That is all happening.
They're trying. It's a very complicated. I mean, when you look at the map even behind you on the wall, you can realize how politically and demographically complex the Lower Mainland is. This is probably the most difficult place in the entire province to do work, just because of the political red tape, the number of user groups, stakeholder groups, and First Nations. There's 30 between the mouth of the Fraser and Yale. So it's complex on a number of angles, but we're really there to try and make sure the nations have a voice, and they also have either the capacity to better manage land or access to those of us that can help put them in a position to do that, execute rights and title, and protect and manage their own natural resources, because that's something that's been taken away from them basically since colonization. Our government has not done a very good job of coming in and recognizing the previous landowners. They've basically just displaced them, given them 2% of their overall land and said, here, have fun, go manage this. Well, the nations aren't happy with that. That's not the way that they would have ever done anything, but it's taken away and invalidated a lot of their rights. So what we do is kind of fight environmentally through better practices to provide them an avenue to push their rights and title and better protect and preserve our natural environment.
Okay.
That's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's a mouthful.
It is a big mouthful.
So,
yeah.
so for those on Radio Land and myself, you guys are going in. I'm going to try to give a synopsis the best I understand. You guys are going to go in and you're going to help them with the knowledge base that they may not have, that you guys have. Say, this is what's best for the environment. This is going to get us the best pristine environment, blah, 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 blah. And then go, oh, hey, these things need to be fixed. Correct. We're going to start this project and get these things fixed. Then you're going to hand that project over to them, and they're going to see it to fruition.
Correct.
Okay, then what?
Then we move on to the next one, to the next community that has a different need, and continuing to support those that have started projects that still want the capacity or service that we provide, right?
So when you say capacity, what do you mean by capacity? What capacity?
People, like human resources to be able to do this is the big, it's the big holdback, right? Like,
okay.
There's a major difference between Western science and traditional ecological knowledge, which is held by the First Nations communities. But the way that we manage land politically is through the lens of Western science. It's not through the lens of indigenous knowledge, which is what we're politically trying to bring back.
Right.
We're trying to heal past oppressive issues and find a way to better manage, because the Western science only lens isn't working because we're in a state of decline in our salmon and it hasn't fixed the problem.
Right.
So we need to diversify our perspective on what we need to do.
So your overall goal is a healthier salmon population.
Yes.
That's what you want.
What really for our organization, what I want doesn't matter. Well, we work for the communities, but that's what they want.
Sure.
So that's effectively what we want. We also want to make sure that the nations have a voice at the table, because everything we see on maps is land that's been either displaced or taken that they still have a right to manage.
Sure.
So pushing their rights forward and making sure that they're at the table, having a voice when their land is being impacted, whether that's by industry or whether that's by, residential, whatever it may be, their voice has been taken away.
Right.
We're just trying to implement it back and then put projects in place as examples of that so that they can sort of root their boots again in what we're trying to do and preserve the environment, but doing it from a shared Western and traditional indigenous perspective.
Interesting. Sounds like two conflicting things almost.
They share some things, but there's definitely some conflicting values in there in terms of like a Western science mind of what proper management is not in line with what a traditional indigenous perspective of proper management is.
Right.
Like for instance, just to give our listeners an idea, the way that the government manages harvest, First Nations harvest of salmon in the Lower Fraser River is by bridge. So they say the nations below the Port Mann Bridge have this allocation, the nations above the Port Mann Bridge get this allocation.
Okay.
But they're doing it on infrastructure, bridges that were built by colonialists.
Right.
That's not the way that the nations used to manage territory traditionally. They used to do it by watershed. So instead of saying this part of the river breaks us apart, they never did that. They never formed maps, right? Most of their knowledge is oral. It's not written down.
Right.
And they would manage it by where the water goes, by the watershed.
Right.
That makes sense.
Right.
Doing it by bridge and by infrastructure, great. It makes things easier.
But it's very arbitrary.
But it's very arbitrary and it has nothing to do with what you need to actually improve and heal the environment.
Right.
Where managing by watershed gives you a much better holistic approach to land use, negative impacts on the environment, managing that, et cetera. So those two perspectives, the Western perspective and the indigenous perspective are in line in some ways, but very much different in others.
Counterintuitive. So how is the salmon population? You said it's declining.
Yep.
And talk about how badly it's declining and how can we stop the decline? What's the future look like for us?
Okay, so the decline. In 2010, the sockeye run was 30 million.
Okay.
In 2022, 12 years later, it was, and I'd have to get my papers out to check this exactly, maybe 4 million.
What?
We are seeing an unprecedented decline of salmon at an astronomical rate.
Holy shit.
Yeah, and
So
that's
just to reiterate, 2010, 30 mil?
30 million sockeye returned to the Fraser River in 2010, and in 2022, I think it was 4.
4 mil.
Yeah, and it's been on a pretty steady decline, and that's just sockeye.
Yeah, of course.
But that pattern's going to be indicative of all the salmon we have around here. We are in a massive decline, and I don't think most people are even aware of the fact that it's going on or what will happen when you have one of these keystone species go extinct, right? It's the same thing we were talking about at the top predator idea.
Yeah.
Right? Salmon aren't the top predator here, but they're the keystone species. They're literally one of the most important animals because of the effects that they have on the entire environment.
Holy shit.
And we're losing that. And you're going to start to see major land use changes because of the fact that you don't have that nutrient input from the salmon runs coming in, and all the other animals are going to have to act accordingly and change their behavior when they don't have that resource. So
when you say salmon poop in the river, that's the
they
nutrient?
poop and they die.
Right.
So like
they
one
decompose.
of the things that farmers hate is the smell of rotting salmon.
Right.
But the value of those rotting salmon to the environment, like the nutrients they put back into the land, the food resource they provide to predators,
right?
All of that is literally like the lifeblood of BC and of the Pacific Northwest is these salmon populations bring so much resource back in.
Right.
It allows the natural environment to flourish. Well, you take that resource away, what happens?
Yeah, all of a sudden the eagles don't have anything to eat, the bears don't have anything.
Everything starts to crash. That kind of stuff. Yeah. Right. So. Yeah, you're seeing major declines, like on a scale of 10 over 12 years, which is mind-boggling. That's how fast that is.
Like, wow, that's insane, dude.
So to answer your question, how do we fix this? I think there's two things you need to understand. First of all, our in-river freshwater environment where these fish spawn and where they live as juveniles is being compromised. Right. When you look at, have you ever taken the West Coast Express from Mission into Vancouver?
Yes.
If you look at the riverbank from where that train starts in Mission all the way to Vancouver, almost the entire riparian or riverbank area from Mission to Vancouver has been developed.
Right.
It's either log booms, it's industry, it's been disturbed, it's been damaged. That's like some of the most critical habitat for out-migrating juvenile salmon.
Right.
Right, it's like this is the last gas station before those juveniles run to the ocean.
Right.
And they come all the way from like Adams and Stewart Lake at the very headwaters of the Fraser River.
Right.
We've destroyed the last stop-off and gas station and compromised that. So the fish that are leaving don't have the same resources available to them in the river.
So they're not making it back.
So they're not as healthy when they get out to the ocean. And then you have fishing and climate change issues.
Yeah.
So you're getting fewer and fewer fish back. So
to clear overfishing. Yeah. It's not just fishing. We're overfishing.
It is overfishing.
Yeah, we're overfishing. I heard that if we stopped all commercial fishing for 4 years, then all of the fish would be back into like the 1800 numbers, something crazy like that.
I've heard estimates of that level. The problem is, I think. I mean, humans never do anything until we absolutely have to. It's like our Achilles heel, right? We're done.
I know.
We're hairless apes that think we're super smart. But I don't know if we could ever actually enforce or get people on board to the idea of not fishing.
You would need a worldwide patrol on international waters and blow up and put these guys in prison for 25 years for poaching during that 4-year thing. Like, it would have to be so heavily enforced by military all around the world.
And we can't
it's
because
impossible.
of the food resource. The other thing is like 70% of the people on the planet live within 2 kilometers of the coast.
Yeah, I know.
And that makes up 75% of the world's diet, right?
Yeah, so the problem is once there's no more food, they're all going to die anyways.
Well, yeah, then we're getting into Hunger Games.
Can we just do 4 years?
I would love to see that.
Instead of just running out of food. You know what I mean? And not to mention, like, the ecosystem of the ocean is so important. Like, it is so important for
it's the pulse of the world.
Yeah, people are like, oh man, they're cutting down the Amazon rainforest. This is so bad. That's the lungs of the world. Actually,
it's the ocean.
There is no oxygen that comes out of the Amazon from the rainforest. All of the oxygen that the rainforest produces stays and is consumed by the life that is in the Amazon. It does not give oxygen to the world. What does is plankton in the ocean. The algae and all of the small life inside the ocean produces 80% of the breathable air that we breathe. 80%. So people are tying themselves to trees in a frivolous attempt to save the world when they should be worried about the health of the oceans. It's wild.
The most important. Like,
so ignorant.
You're already starting to see climate change effects from ocean currents changing as
That's
a
what I'm
result
saying.
of,
Yeah, I was talking
right,
about the
like-
ocean current earlier about going up and warming Europe.
Yep.
That warm, what's it called? The current that goes up and
The Gulf Stream.
yeah, it goes up and it warms up Europe. Basically, makes you. Did you
Some
know
of
that
those cyclical Atlantic Ocean
Europe
currents? Yeah.
is? I think it's Europe or the UK is like parallel to Siberia, something like that. It's like on the same, and it's only so much more habitable because it's the ocean current warms up that area.
Yep.
Well, when that ocean current isn't flowing the same way anymore because of global warming and these things change, guess what happens? Now all of Europe is Siberia.
And that will happen a lot quicker than you think.
It'll be like a light switch.
The impacts of that are wild. I was at a
Well, then think about this. They're going to need more power to heat their homes.
Yep.
Everyone that lives there is going to want to leave. There'll be a mass migration into closer to the equator and stuff like that because they won't have heat. It's just like it's a massive problem.
Yep.
People think, global warming is the that's why they change it to climate change. Global warming is a problem. The planet's going to slightly heat up, and people are like, oh, who cares? It's too cold here anyways. No. You don't understand. It's not about the planet slightly heating up. It's about everything not working properly.
Yep.
And then the planet having to re-equalize, which is going to be then where does it re-equalize? You know what I mean? We're going into an ice age because of the flow of the oceans not working properly, not heating. It's like it's these are major problems.
It changes global weather patterns.
Yeah.
Like
Everything.
I heard a climate scientist once suggest that because we've heard a lot about the jet stream moving,
Yes.
right? That's why you get these atmospheric rivers
Yes.
and slowing down.
Oh wow.
And the idea that if the jet stream stopped, Europe would turn into Siberia
Right.
fairly quickly, right? Because
Right.
the global weather patterns would change
Yep.
drastically and significantly, right? We're not there yet, but it's like we're like the frog in the pot of boiling water. You're just sitting there waiting for the hot tub to get warmer and warmer until it's too late, right?
So for those of you who don't know what he's talking about, when you put a frog in water and you turn the water on to boil, the frog will stay there and die in the water because the water is slowly adjusting. The frog doesn't realize that it's getting cooked. It stays in there until it's dead. If you throw a frog into boiling water, it will jump out.
Correct.
We essentially are the frog in the hot, and it's getting hotter and hotter and hotter. And it's not about heat in the sense, it is about change.
Totally.
So we're screwing up the environment enough, 30 million salmon to 4.
Mm-hmm.
That's wild. That's one species.
That's one of the sort of key identifiers of salmon health as a sockeye run. But part of the issue there is we had what was called the blob. And the blob was from about 2017, 2018 till about 2022, there was an area of higher than average temperature over the Pacific Ocean west of Vancouver Island.
Okay.
So it was this
Blob
very
of warm
strange
water.
blob of warm air.
Okay.
Well, what happened? It warmed up the water.
Right.
And now that's changing the entire environment for the resources that the salmon rely on to be able to grow in the ocean. And now you're starting to see declines come back. Well, you pair that with what we've done to salmon habitat.
Right.
Where is the positive area for those fish to be able to continue to propagate, right?
Right.
If they can't do it in the ocean and they can't do it in river,
Right.
you're kind of hooped.
So this is such a multifaceted problem.
It is what they call death by 1,000 cuts.
Right.
There's a very sort of popular term going around called cumulative effects.
Okay.
And what cumulative effects refers to is basically death by 1,000 cuts.
Right.
It's not one thing in particular which has solely caused the decline in this. It's a combination of like 300 things acting together that cause this, right? Like you can't say, oh, well, it's just been habitat destruction in the Lower Fraser that's caused a decline in salmon. That's part of it. Is it just the logging companies that have cut it down, that have impacted the watersheds? No, it's not just them. Do they add to it? Yes, they do.
Right.
But then you look at industry, you look at pollution, right? You look at temperature change. It's not one thing. It's all of them adding up that are all working against salmon survival.
Right.
And now you're starting to see the very quick impacts over a short period of time of how bad that can be.
So why does the average Joe need to give a shit about the salmon? Why do we care? Why should we care? Why should we be writing our politicians?
Wow, that's such a loaded question.
All right, let's break it down.
No,
Go one at a time, one
Yeah.
point at a time. Don't worry about getting it all off in one round.
Why should everyone
Why
care?
should we care?
The reason why we have the rich biodiversity in BC is because of the fact that you have such rich biodiversity out here. And
So what do you mean rich biodiversity?
You have such like a wide array of animals and healthy environments. And I mean, that's what people come. You see BC, you see postcards, you see healthy forests and mountains.
Yep. Beautiful British Columbia.
Totally. A lot of that is driven by ecosystem services like salmon, which allow that natural environment to propagate to the level that it has.
Right.
If we lose those salmon stocks, you lose a massive nutrient introduction to most of the province.
Okay.
And you will over time start to see declines in predators, and then you get into this trophic cascade that you were talking about, and everything starts to change. And over time, the environment's going to get less and less and less healthy.
Right.
And aesthetically, at first, people aren't going to like that. But when we start to understand the impacts of what that's doing to the land,
right,
then it becomes apparent, because then it starts to affect the human population. So why should the average Joe care about salmon? Because they are literally one of the most important balancing species that you could get in BC. And if salmon populations are healthy, the rest of the environment will follow suit.
Right.
Whereas if you protect other species, you're not going to get the same kind of massive effect, because everything in here really relies on that seasonal introduction of salmon.
Right.
Without it, the entire environment changes, and then, as you say, it's not the heat, it's the change. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah, the trickle down is you have less eagles, you have more rodents, you have this is the whole bunch of different things that are going to trickle down into it. So yeah, that's interesting. So salmon, you use the word keynote. Is it keynote? Keystone. Thank you. Yeah. Keystone species. So it's not just. I mean, what are the different salmon runs that we have? Are they running every year?
Yep.
So
yeah.
Every year we have a. Is it? I heard. Is it every 4 years we have a big run?
Yes.
Okay. Let's explain that.
We should be in opposite chairs here. Yes. Historically, they didn't.
Okay.
Historically, salmon before contact, before we started harvest, before all of these environmental problems, would have run big every year.
No shit.
It's I think only because of the fact that certain cohorts are surviving better than others, certain years are surviving better than others, that we get these big cycle years. So like sockeye run big every 4 years.
Okay.
Historically, would they have run big every year? Yeah, probably.
Wow.
You've got 5 species of Pacific salmon out here: Chinook, sockeye, coho, chum, and pinks.
Okay.
And then you've got steelhead, which is a trout technically, but has a life history similar to salmon. They're kind of confused.
Okay.
They decide to be salmon sometimes. They decide to be trout sometimes.
Love it.
Yeah, they're really quite weird. They can also go out to sea and come back in and not die and spawn multiple times. That's another whole mind blow. Because salmon will go out to the ocean, come back, spawn, and die.
Right.
Steelhead can be like, no, I'm not going to die this time.
Actually?
Yeah, I'm going to go run to the ocean and come back in and spawn again.
Wow.
But they
so
usually
that's like the crackhead of the ocean.
Totally.
They're just indestructible.
They're and
sometimes I look at this is a bad segue, and I apologize to my mother, but sometimes I'll see homeless people and they're all cracked out or whatever, and I'm like, my God, the endurance of the human body is unreal.
Yes,
it's sad. Obviously, this is a sad thing, but it's like, my God, bulletproof.
Yeah,
unreal, bouncing off of standing up, like it's just wild. Anyways, I digress. So this is the indestructible.
Yes.
Crackhead of the ocean.
It is.
Okay.
Culturally, the First Nations focus their harvest on Chinook and sockeye. Those are the two.
Chinook, sockeye.
Yeah.
And they taste the best?
They're the ones that are the best food fish.
Okay.
They run usually in the summer, so like they'll start running in the spring.
Sure.
Chinook usually run first, and then sockeye. Let me make sure I get my numbers right here. Pinks usually run summer, and then you get fall run is the chum run, and then fall winter run is coho.
Okay. Are you eating chum and coho or no?
There's still a harvest, not so much for coho, but there's still a strong faction of the First Nations communities that will harvest chum.
And I assume they smoke them, and that's makes it more edible if they're smoked.
But those are the ones that they're primarily interested in, and
sure.
The Chinook and the sockeye declines are the ones that are really most evident.
Right.
It's not directly related to the First Nations harvest. Like
of course not.
There's a misnomer around here that the gill nets in the river are killing that.
Yeah.
But keep in mind that over the last 20 years, the First Nations have lost 90% of their fishing access. So we can't blame the nations for harvesting all the fish. They've lost 90% of their access to the fish. They now measure their harvest openings in minutes, where they used to measure them in weeks and months. Right. So,
wow.
It's not. It's not on them. They're a scapegoat a lot of the time.
Well, I was about to say that they're a scapegoat for people. I can't catch any more fish because they're doing it with the nets. Well, no, actually, it used to be 30 million in 2010, and now it's 4 million. So it's not that they're taking all the fish; it's that there are no fish for a multitude of reasons.
Exactly.
Like
we
the warm
mismanage the
blob,
resources. Exactly.
the the coastlines, all the kind of stuff.
Yep.
Right. This is interesting.
And
I'm
that's why it's
interested.
so heavily managed.
Right.
And that's why there's such a concern about the stark decline. Like, I've worked in different areas and seen places where, coral reefs are declining and other populations are
this
declining.
is a huge problem. Like a coral reef decline is a huge problem. Like people don't realize.
That is dire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I honestly think, you know what you need to do? You need to ban commercial, like fishing, and be able to purchase it like commercially for 8 years. If they won't do a full ban on
You
4
need a
years,
moratorium.
then
Yeah.
we say, okay, you can't have fish in a restaurant. You can't buy it in a grocery store. And for 8 years, there's no purchasing of fish. You pay the fisherman CERB.
Yep.
For 4 years, 8 years, whatever it is that we need, and let's get these stock numbers back. Because this is such a big problem, dude.
There's a lot of chatter about that.
There
right?
needs to be something. There needs to be something. They need to take the
Completely.
consumption down by 90%. I understand that you're not going to stop, Joe from going out into his, dock and throwing a line and pulling up a fish, and you're not going to stop the First Nations from fishing. And I'm not asking for that, but I am saying if we stopped at the grocery store, if we stopped at the restaurants, if we stopped all of that just for a small period of time, just to get us back to healthy numbers. 30 million.
We're going to have to get to that point.
4 million.
We're going to have to get to that point.
Well,
right?
What happens when it's 100,000?
It's
right.
We're managing what's left. We're not managing in abundance anymore.
That's
right?
brutal,
It's
man.
like we're going to get to the point, if we're not there already, where the only option is severe.
Right.
It's like if we want to have salmon, we need to do one of two things. We need to either stop fishing, period.
Right.
Or we need to look at what the United States does and drastically increase the amount of production of salmon. So like the U.S. is very, very good at producing large numbers of salmon. They've managed to maintain salmon stocks. Yeah. So they'll grow them in hatcheries and then release them into the rivers.
I heard that the farm salmon aren't as there's issues with it. There's parasites. There's issues. What are the issues with it?
So farm salmon and hatchery salmon are different. Farm salmon would be the ones you see in like aquaculture cages.
Yeah.
Which has its own set of problems.
Yeah, they're growing in their own
disease,
poop and disease, lice. Yeah.
Hatcheries are where you actually take the fish from egg, you fertilize them, you get them until they're in that sort of juvenile smolt phase.
The tadpole stage.
Yeah, and then you release them back into the river.
Right.
So you're not having them develop in an artificial environment.
So they are wild, but they're hatched.
They're hatchery grown, but they're wild.
Yeah, so I went on a salmon catching expedition where we caught, and I caught I believe it was you're allowed to keep the hatchery ones or the wild ones?
Yep, hatchery ones you're allowed to keep.
Okay, so I caught a wild one, I guess. I had to give it back.
Yep.
I had let it go or whatever. So the hatchery ones, they have a notch in the fin.
Correct.
And then you
they
can
take off one of their fins and you'll be able to know when you catch them.
Right. Okay.
Yep.
So why don't we just ramp this up by 8,000%?
That's something that a lot of the nations are pushing, which is
needs to happen.
We need production. That's how the United States has done it. Why? I think what we're worried about is watering down the wild population.
Well, listen, if there is no wild population, you can't water it down.
And that's the argument.
Right.
Yeah,
so,
you can't water down nothing.
Right. Yeah, that's insane.
Yeah.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Fraser River is one of the last undammed rivers in the Western Seaboard, like naturally undammed. Is that correct?
Yes, the main stem of it is undammed. Like the Columbia has
8,700 dams.
Crazy.
Yeah. Thank you. And that's all going to LA and California. All that, it's all going down there. So yeah. Anyways.
But this one, I mean, like some of the tributaries, like the Stave Lake is dammed.
For sure it is.
But the main artery of the Fraser is undammed.
Right.
It's also one of the last major salmon, or was one of the last major salmon producing rivers north of our border.
Right.
Like you've got the Skeena, you've got the NAS systems, but on a productivity measure, at full run, the Fraser dwarfs everything.
Right.
But now it's not.
Right.
Because of the problems that we've implemented
and
imposed upon the environment.
Right. All of the river walks, all of the
bad land use decisions and I'm not here to point fingers, but like if we're putting so much investment in agriculture and then all of a sudden we're diking, we're levying, we're ditching, we're straightening.
Yep.
There are consequences to every single one of those actions when you mess with the natural flow pattern of water.
It's like, oh, thank God we've got a lot of berry production, but now we have no salmon.
Totally.
Sick.
Yeah.
Sick.
Yeah. And that's one example. It's not.
We're not pointing the finger at one thing.
Not at all.
It's like you said, this is a multifaceted problem, which is going to require a multifaceted solution.
Absolutely.
We need to stop Yeah, I
something.
personally believe that we need to stop the actual commercial demand for fishing. So like if there's no commercial demand, these guys can't go out. There's no one to sell. That's
true.
They're going to stop fishing, right? So if we say we're going to put a ban on fishing for, 4 years, 8 years, whatever it is, just to get the numbers back. Because I mean, honestly, people don't understand. I think we need to make people more aware of this. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like at a macro level, because once it's gone, it's gone. You don't get endangered endangered species you can save, but you can't get extinct back.
No.
You know what I mean?
This is in Jurassic Park.
Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't work that way, right?
I
love that movie too.
It's a great movie. But yeah, no, that's insane, dude. I didn't realize it was so bad.
It is dire.
This is insane.
It's getting to the point where this should be getting a lot more airtime.
Yeah, no doubt.
Given the environmental domino effect that this is going to start if we're not careful.
Yeah, I think that needs to be made aware to people.
Totally.
And it's like, I mean, we got to talk to somebody. We got to do something.
Yeah.
I can't just sit here and, I mean, yeah, that's wild, dude.
And it's one of these things that's happening in your own backyard, but you're blind to it, right?
Yeah.
It's like nose on your face kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, like this is a very much a BC problem. Like,
Totally.
I'm a BC local, born and bred. You know what I mean? I didn't go to the Caribbean like you did, you lucky dog. I've just been here, letting the salmon die under my nose the entire time.
I don't think you can take quite so much blame, but
no, I'm not Gandhi, but
no,
I mean, seriously, that's wild, man.
Yeah,
all right,
it's a thing.
So obviously, you guys are doing your part.
Yep.
With the First Nations, you know, giving them the education, helping as best we can, give them the pristine habitat for the salmon and stuff like that. But they only have 10% of of what they used to have.
That's true, but what we look at is not the reserve area that they're on now. We look at traditional territory.
Right.
And effectively, when you look at BC, pretty well the entire province is traditional territory of somebody.
Well, I mean, the entire country was at one point, if you want to go back farther enough. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of what we do is off reserve, because that's like we'll work on the major river systems and then work with the communities in different areas within that river system, within their traditional territory.
Right.
So, like if we're working in one part of the Chilliwack River, we might be working with, Squiala and Chiacton First Nations. If we're further upriver on the Camp and Hope Slough, we're dealing with the Pulult tribes, which is Squaw, Cham, and Quaquapilt. So we work with various communities in different areas.
Your pronunciation was flawless, by the way.
My Halkomelem is terrible. But I've had those ones ground in, so I can say those ones without butchering them.
Yeah.
But that's kind of how we manage it, and they look at their traditional territory as their responsibility, it's not what they have now, it's what was taken that's their responsibility.
Oh, that's cool. That's a great way to look at it.
Oh, we've been put on a 2 kilometer by 2 kilometer reserve, and that's what we're responsible for now. No, like their culture is a culture of stewardship and focuses on protecting everything that's theirs.
Wow, that must be so difficult for them, eh?
Well, it's difficult when you see what's happened with
that's what I'm saying.
Amount of influence that they've lost.
Yeah, if you look historically, like this is our responsibility, then you have all of these, essentially, forgive me for saying, white people living on this land doing the exact opposite.
I'm one of them too, right?
Yeah,
so like
doing the exact opposite of what they historically would be doing.
Yep.
And it's like, wow, that's wild, man. They just they're just sitting there and taking it. That sucks.
Well, you look at the 2021 atmospheric river and the return of Sumas Lake.
Right.
We're in the process of putting out a paper in Frontiers of Conservation Science about the socioeconomic option of returning Sumas Lake and the strategic retreat away from Sumas Prairie, which I'm sure will rattle a lot of people in Abbotsford.
Wow.
But it's the idea of the fact that Sumas Lake was stolen from Sumas First Nation in 1924 when the Vetter Canal was built.
Right.
Because they drained it because they couldn't control it. They wanted to turn that into farmland, which they've subsequently done.
Yeah, and it was pretty horrific mosquitoes. Like it was, there's some stuff in the air that was pretty bad or whatever. So yeah, I don't know. They wanted the farmland.
Yeah.
Essentially.
But without realizing that Sumas Lake was a very important functional ecosystem for not only food security, but flood water storage.
Right.
So we've taken away this gigantic basin that used to hold floodwater. And now when the floods come in, there's nowhere for that water to go. So what happens? Well, look what happened in 2021. Sumas Lake came back, right?
Yeah, regardless of whether you wanted it to or not.
If Sumas Lake was there, you got more water storage and the impact of the flood is reduced.
You could get all the tea times you wanted at Fraser Glen, though.
Well, if Sumas Lake was there, no, you probably couldn't.
Nobody else was golfing there.
That's true. Yeah, that place was completely underwater.
Yeah,
that was wild.
Yeah,
but that is one of the things that you need to look at, and that's some of the things that the nation's been dealing with, right? It's just land stolen. It's not been ceded. It's just been taken. We're gonna put in Barrowtown Pump Station to protect the return from Sumas Lake, and we're gonna build basically the lower part of the Chilliwack River into a straight run Vetter Canal. Right. And you saw the importance of the Barrowtown Pump Station and its near failure during the atmospheric flood. Well, like that flood would have been exponentially worse had that pump station failed.
Right, of course.
Right. And you saw how bad it was anyways. But like that's some of the things that the nations have had to deal with since contact, which is land being stolen, it being changed. They no longer have the lake system there, but when Mother Nature gets mad, she brings it back.
Right.
So why are we fighting that? That's a point of reconciliation of like, why don't we consider bringing this back?
Yeah, and you're going to have people on the other side. This is our home now. We've been here for 100 years, et cetera, et cetera, blah, blah, blah.
But your 100 years doesn't really hold a candle to the community that's been there for 10,000.
Right.
But that's some of the things they deal with, right? But they look at this whole area as their responsibility. It's not just what we have now. It's what was ours.
It's an interesting way to look at the stewardship that they have for the land. That is historically theirs.
And as a non-Indigenous person working for an Indigenous organization, it took a while for you to wrap your head around the fact that everything that you're looking at from not an incorrect, but a not holistic worldview.
Right.
Because until you understand the worldview and the perspective and the culture of stewardship within First Nations communities, and contrast that to the colonial approach of break everything up, map it, hand it out.
Yeah, you get from this bridge to this bridge.
You start to see things a little differently.
Sure.
Right, and you start to understand why you get direction and why there's so much knowledge in the communities about the way things need to go, because this has changed. Oh, well, it's not working. Well, it's because you changed it from what it was in the first place. Right.
Right.
And we know that.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And like, I'll give you an example. Our director, during the 2021 flood, he lives on Kilgard Road, just off of Sumas Mountain Road.
Yeah.
And he sent a picture out on Facebook during the 2021 flood of his backyard. And the floodwaters had come right up to like his wife's horse barn in the backyard and no further. And a number of people on Facebook sent messages like, "Oh, Murray, you're really lucky. Like, whoa, you just dodged that bullet." And his response was, "No, this is what traditional ecological knowledge is. Our community knows where the high water line of Sumas Lake was, and we built above it. So even if the lake comes back, my house is going to be safe because I know where this lake used to be, and I know this is not luck. This is the value of traditional ecological knowledge in using land.
Right.
Because there used to be a lake there.
Right.
And that lake, when it was existent, would have been in my backyard, and I built above that, and I knew.
Right.
Right. So it's that worldview of like, oh, well, why did they build on the side of the mountain? It's, well, there used to be a lake there.
Right.
Right. And they've designed it around the idea of the lake being there because they didn't want to change the lake and straighten it. They just wanted to live in harmony with it.
Right.
And that's the perspective of like, okay, there's alternative ways of doing things and protecting and conserving the environment that isn't just coming from a research paper from academia of someone in a university that's not connected here who thinks it's a bright idea to put forward a theory that could have consequences that isn't grounded in ecological knowledge. And then you look at it and it's like, well, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
But the community, what they've been preaching for 20 years seems to make a whole lot of sense because that's the way things used to work when everything was in harmony.
Right.
And we've lost that, I think.
Yeah. Well, we have for sure. I mean, I'm in real estate, so I'm on the side of development. I'm on the side of houses for people and stuff like that. But you do have to have an environmental stewardship when doing that. Otherwise, with respect to the Chinese, you will live in China, which is a grossly populated people living on top of people, very, very poorly planned. For a majority of their eastern seaboard, it's horrific, horrific. And one of my friends that moved from China, he said, I can let my kids come out in Canada and they can play in the streams. I'm like, what do you mean play in the streams? You can't do that in China? He's like, no, they're full of acid. The kids play in it, they get acid burns on their skin. So it's like, that's how bad it is.
How bad it can get.
That's how bad it can get. So, you have to be intelligent when developing, in the sense that you've got to be aware of what's going on and what's around you, right?
Totally.
So, things that they allowed in the 70s and 80s, they don't allow now. And
what they used to do is amazing.
Oh, it's wild.
We do work north of Pitt Lake, and there's a creek system up there that the federal government's been working on since the 40s and 50s. And there is an old, it's not used anymore, there's an engine and basically sort of like a wire. It looks like a gondola wire.
Mm-hmm.
And what they used to do is they used to use that to ferry rock drills and Semtex up to the top headwaters of the creek to drill and blow things up to change the creek pattern.
Perfect.
What you were doing.
Wow.
To get the permits to use those rock drills and Semtex now would take you 10 years and you'd never get approval.
Sure.
Right? Like what we used to do is crazy compared to what we're allowed to do now, right?
Yeah.
So you see some of those artifacts of like the Vetter Canals one, right?
Right.
Like wow, the Army Corps of Engineers just basically straightened the Chilliwack River.
Right.
Because it was a nuisance to have a lake there.
Right.
But like, where's the thought about what the consequences of that are going to
Yeah,
be?
yeah, yeah.
Right?
I mean,
we
I
didn't
guess
have it back then.
even the mosquitoes are food for the fish and stuff too, right? So,
Totally.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, where do we leave this, man? Where do we leave this? How do we wrap this up? Sounds pretty bleak. Sounds like we're going to be out of salmon in 10 years.
It does.
What's going to happen?
I would like to think that from my perspective, human crisis brings people together. And I think we're starting to see that.
I think so, yeah.
Because a lot of times we won't react until we absolutely have to.
You got to get average Joes like me to be aware of the situation.
Well,
You know what I
some
mean?
of it's outreach.
Yeah.
I wouldn't call yourself an average Joe.
Stop it.
But there needs to be a focus on not just economic value.
Right.
We need to understand the fact that without environmental value, we can't have economic value because
Yeah.
that economic value is built on
the
needs of the
environmental value.
environment.
That's right. Yeah.
So there is hope. We're not SOL yet.
Right.
But there needs to be a focus, which there has been. But the problem is with government, it changes. Right?
Yeah. Well, this is the issue with such a short-term government.
Of course.
Is that they're making 4-year decisions, not 40 or 80-year decisions.
No, and
because
usually
it's
they won't make a
unpopular.
decision in the fourth year.
That's right. It's unpopular to make a long-term decision because it costs money.
Of course.
So it takes out of their budget, makes their numbers look bad.
Yep.
So they're not actually making the right decisions for the country in the long term. And ironically, this is where some dictatorial countries can make long-term decisions. Like China's really good at building infrastructure. We talked about how bad they are with the environment, but they'll make infrastructure decisions that'll be 80 years into the future. Great for infrastructure.
Yep.
If we can do that environmentally, have some environmental stewardship into the future. I mean, I think we're doing a decent job, but the fact that we've got a salmon run from 30 million to 4 mil
in 12 years.
Yeah, that's insane, dude. That should be an absolute. Like the canary is already dead.
Oh, definitely.
It's dead.
Yeah.
So that's a canary in a coal mine. They would bring canaries down in a coal mine, and if the canary died, that means get out.
Yeah.
Because the
Poisonous.
canary is the air is poisonous. And canary will die first. I'll let you know that you're slowly getting poisoned. So get out. This is what's happening. The canary's dead. The salmon are dead. 30 million to 4 mil.
Yep.
That's the canary in the coal mine. It's already dead.
Yep.
So we need to make the change.
There needs to be some significant land use decision changes. There needs to be a complete shift of the focus of the protection of that environment. Needs to be like one of the, if not the top priority for any incoming government.
Yeah.
If we want to maintain our lifestyle and our quality of life in BC. Like that's
Right.
really what it comes down to, because
Right.
the reality without salmon is extremely bleak, and it's going to set off a chain reaction that's going to have consequences for decades and decades.
Forever.
And decades, right?
Forever.
Yeah, totally. It'll change
Once
the
they're
entire
gone,
landscape.
they're gone.
Yep.
That's it.
Yeah. So how do we fix it? I mean, outreach is one of them.
Yeah.
Telling the story of the work when it gets done
Mhm.
is pretty important, and
We-
sort of continuing to push and
we
get
gotta-
people into the industry.
We got to
That's
get the
other thing.
hatcheries up too, man. We got to start making more fish. We got to
Yeah.
get the stocks back. I mean,
We
that's
also need to provide people a better avenue to understand how to get into this world,
right.
because that's one of the things that's kind of very gray, right?
Right.
And that's like our academic approach for so many years was go to high school, go to university, then go get a job.
Right.
And trades was a secondary thing.
Yeah.
Well, they're more necessary now than ever.
Right.
And so many people have gotten disenchanted with this idea of going to university, coming out with a degree, and having no job prospects.
Mm-hmm.
That I feel like fewer and fewer people are doing it.
Right.
Where I think there needs to be a focus on, like, we need more people in this industry doing this kind of work if we're going to have a hope of protecting this. And we need to sort of figure out a way to get that pipeline of people coming back into this industry and making it clearer as to where the opportunities are and how.
Right.
I think that's because for me, as your average Joe, I had to do a roundabout way of getting to where I am now. I didn't take the traditional route.
Yeah.
If I'd had a template as to what my options were,
Mm-hmm.
and this goes back to our education system, it would provide people an avenue to understand that this is a possible thing, not just something you see of George Costanza pulling a golf ball out of a whale, but like that's a viable career option.
He got laid that night, just so you know.
He did, and I will tell you that is also a misnomer.
This isn't a sexy career, folks.
Not usually.
You're not a firefighter.
No,
you're not a cop. You don't get a sick uniform.
I don't have my own calendar.
Yeah, you're not a Marine.
No. But I think there needs to be a bigger focus on first of all connecting the First Nations communities, because the value of their insight is, I think, going to be one of the turning points in how we turn the situation around.
For sure.
And providing people a better avenue as to how to get involved with this.
Yeah.
Right.
I think people in general do care.
I think
if they knew, if they know. So like, they were told that buying an electric car was better for the environment. People started buying electric cars.
Right.
They were told, put a solar power on your roof and that'll help. People started doing that. I think people genuinely do care. They recycle because they were told that recycling is good, even though it goes into the same landfill that your garbage does.
Right.
Surprise, surprise, guys. So I think there's the general notion that people do care and they do want to preserve the environment. So I think knowledge to them is important. I think getting the word out, creating programs where we're talking to the kids and explaining what's going on.
Yep. We
got to get people on it. People are protesting on the streets with the truckers and stuff like that because that was something that got people off the couch. This has got to be something that gets people going. It really does. This is an alarm for me for sure. This is wild. 30 million to 4 in 12 years.
And it's continuing to
and it's
decline.
getting worse.
Like our estimate
this is
on a down year now is like 200,000 to 300,000
this
year.
This is the salmon holocaust, man.
It is.
Yeah, this is
bad.
And I'm not saying that lightly as a joke to how horrific the Holocaust was. It was horrific, and I believe that it happened. I'm saying this is serious. They don't have voices.
Unprecedented ecological consequences.
Yeah, ripple effect down. We can't even understand.
No.
Oh, that's insane. All right, well, that's a really nice way to leave this off. I mean, what a positive perspective that we have now.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, I think sometimes people just need a fist punch of reality.
Yeah, taste of the bitter. Leave them with the bitter taste in their mouth. Maybe it'll motivate them to do something.
Yeah.
Is there an organization we can donate to, send money to that's fighting the good fight? How do we help? What do we do?
That's a good question.
What do we do?
What do we do? I mean, there are definitely organizations out there. We do a lot of work with WWF Canada. I'll give them a
WWF.
World Wildlife Fund.
That is not what I thought it was.
No, I know.
I thought there was going to be men in
I'm thinking
tights.
of the panda.
Okay.
The panda logo.
Okay.
They've invested a lot of money in environmental conservation.
Okay.
There are groups out there that are doing that.
That was WWF?
WWF is one of them,
okay.
Yeah. Pacific Salmon Foundation's another sort of good non-Indigenous organization that does a lot of work.
Sure.
But then I would say for the average Joe, no one really wants to go out and petition, but there needs to be more focus and priority from our political agenda on this.
Yeah.
Like that. And I'm not a political scientist, so how you translate my work into changing policy, I only know by going out there, doing work, sharing story, and then putting pressure on government.
Wow,
That's the way that
I mean, there has to be such immense pressure on the government from the general population that they actually do something.
Yep.
Because they don't. They won't and they don't.
And salmon's not a sympathetic species. People are all about saving the whales because they're big sympathetic animals and they're beautiful, but no salmon, no whales. You're already starting to see that, right?
Right.
So
Jesus.
Recognizing the value of this, and everywhere you go in the lower mainland and walk through fresh water is probably fish habitat.
Right.
So just keep that. That's probably the first and foremost thing.
Yeah.
Is just leave the environments as pristine as you can.
Don't be dumping toxic waste in the waters.
Don't be running your kids and your dogs through the creeks during the summer and the fall months when there's fish eggs in the rivers. There's a few public outreach things you could do to protect and save it, but most of it's just getting the information out there, and I think this is one of them, right?
Yeah.
If you understand how bad things are, you understand that people need to take action, even if it's small. It's the only way to heal cumulative effects
is cumulative action.
Cumulative action.
Yeah.
Has to be.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, you've rattled me for sure. So one
mission achieved.
One conversion.
Yeah.
One conversion down. 5 million to go.
Perfect.
There's 5 more million people in BC we got to reach with this kind of information. So, geez, man, I appreciate you coming on.
This has been fantastic.
Yeah,
I've never done a podcast before, so this has been a new experience.
You're
for me.
an expert, man.
Well,
Joe Rogan gets scientists on. I'm faux Rogan. I get my version of scientists.
You'll get actual scientists on?
I don't get real scientists. I get marine biologists and stuff like that. As close as I can get. But I think it was a good conversation.
Hey,
I enjoyed
appreciated
it.
this.
And I definitely learned something today. I didn't realize how dire this was.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to stop ordering sockeye salmon in my sushi for right now, but
That's okay.
you know, I definitely think there's something that we need to do, though.
I would agree wholeheartedly.
Commercially, environmentally, education with kids,
Yeah.
you know, protecting the environment, like you said, running your kids and dogs through creeks. Never thought of that.
This is one easy way.
Yeah, I never even thought of that. Not
Yeah.
once. You know what I mean? So, swim in the lakes. Don't rip up the creeks.
Yep.
Wow.
It's a good way to start.
Okay. All right, buddy. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks,
Appreciate
man.
it.
Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.